Joining us now, Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia. He's author of the new book titled A Way Out of No Way, a memoir of truth, transformation, and the new American story. Senator, good morning. It's good to see you here in New York with us.
Good morning.
Want to get to the book in just a moment, but also want to ask you about what you've seen in this hearing room over the last several days and what you think the stakes are, why this is an important exercise for this committee.
Nothing less than our democracy is at stake. Thanks. It's great to be here. We've got work to do. Democracy is not a noun, it's a verb. And it's the reason why, I decided to run. My whole life has been about ministry. I knew early on that I would go into the pastorate. And I've spent years registering voters, so-called low propensity voters in Georgia, which I think is a terrible term. It's sort of self-fulfilling. But the people of Georgia found their voice, and they stood up in unprecedented numbers. And on January 5th, Georgia sent its first African-American senator to the United States Senate and its first Jewish senator in one fell swoop. And I feel like Martin Luther King Jr. and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel were smiling because they marched together in Selma with the vision of this multiracial democracy that embraces all of us. And the people of Georgia stood up. So we've got to take seriously what happened in January 6th. After all, the violent attack that we saw on our Capitol metastasized in voter suppression bills all across the country, including Georgia. We don't get to pretend like January 6th did not happen. It happened. Anti-Semitic signs, racist signs, kind of xenophobia, traffic through our Capitol. Police officers were brutalized. People died, all driven by the big lie that certain voices don't count, that you don't get to decide the future of the country. So January 6th happened. And it tells us something about our complicated family story, our American story that we may not want to hear. But January 5th also happened. A kid who grew up in public housing got elected to the United States Senate. And so what's at stake right now? We got to decide if we're the America of January 6th or the America of January 5th. Are we going to give in to the forces of division and demagoguery in our country, or are we going to push closer towards our ideals, e pluribus unum, out of many one?
You're right. So much of the story of 2020 took place in Georgia. That was sort of the crucible, the epicenter of your race. Of course, Republicans blame Donald Trump for getting involved. And also on the presidential side, when President Trump called Secretary of State Raffensperger, said, please find these 11,000 votes. He didn't say please, he said find the votes and overturn the election. Why did you make the leap? And you write about this in your book, Senator, from being a prominent pastor at Ebenezer, one of the most prominent churches in the country, of course, where Martin Luther King was pastor himself. Why did you say, I'm going to leave that life, perhaps temporarily, and go jump into this arena of politics where it's ugly and it can be tough on families and everything else that politics is? Why did you do that?
Well, to be sure, I have not left my pulpit.
Yeah.
I still preach most Sundays. But not only am I a pastor, my dad was a pastor, and my mom's a pastor. My dad was an older father, born in 1917, World War II veteran. He also had two jobs. He was a junk man. He used to salvage old junk cars, load them on the back of a truck, the mechanisms of which he designed himself without a degree in engineering. When I think about it now, I marvel at how he stacked these cars one on top of another. That's how he took care of his family. And then the junk man who lifted broken cars during the week, lifted broken people on Sunday morning, convincing them of their value. Inspired by him, I was able to finish Morehouse College, go to seminary, became the pastor of Ebenezer Church. And I've been working for years on issues that broken people and broken communities are experiencing, everything from health care to voting rights, to making sure working people, hardworking people, can have a livable wage and find a way for their children to pursue the American dream. And with some convincing, I finally decided to get involved in something as messy as politics. But I'll be clear, I'm not in love with politics. I'm in love with change. And I am willing to be engaged in this work with the hope that we might create a future that embraces all of our children.
And just as you've begun to settle in there on Capitol Hill, you've got to run again. So you won your primary. Now you're facing Herschel Walker in the primary election. He's, of course, a football star and an icon in that state. But all of the things that we're talking about here perhaps pale in comparison to the fact that people in Georgia and across the country are paying a lot of money right now for things like gas and groceries. What is your message to those people who say, look, we've got a Democratic president, Democratic Senate, Democratic House, and all these problems are taking place on their watch, and we need some change? What do you say to that voter?
Well, I think as people are sitting around their kitchen table right now trying to figure out their problems, they're not thinking about the politicians' problems. And, I think the problem with politics so often is we're thinking about the politicians, who's up, who's down, who's in, who's out. And I'm focused on the struggles of ordinary people. I know what it's like to try to figure out how you're going to pay your tuition. I'm the first college graduate in my family. I'm number 11 out of 12. I go back to my church every Sunday morning so that I can hear the concerns of ordinary people, which is why I introduced a bill to lower the cost of insulin. I come from a state where 1 in 12 people have diabetes. As a pastor, I've been there with families when the diabetes has gotten out of control and someone has to have an amputation or go to dialysis. And we're witnessing Big Pharma gouge the cost of insulin, a drug that's been around over 100 years. Consumers are paying record prices at the pump, but oil and gas companies are enjoying record profits.
So what do you do about that? Because people in Macon and Marietta and Alpharetta and Albany want to know, when are these prices going to come down? You're in power, you're the senator. What do you do about that? What do you say to them?
I think you have to stay engaged and work on these issues. I'm also focused on lowering the cost of prescription drugs. I've introduced a bill that would suspend the federal gas tax. And in the meantime, while we work on this short term, we've got to embrace a future that is sustainable. I introduced a bill called the Clean Commute for Kids Act, which is literally focused on greening our yellow school buses. We've got a company down in Fort Valley, Georgia, that's leading the way with electric school buses, sustainable energy. And so there's no silver bullet for all of these, but we've got to be focused on the issues and make sure that we're focused on the people, not the politicians.
So inflation, obviously front of mind, but there are other challenges right now facing Democrats. And you mentioned that Georgia's one of the number of states that changed voting laws, that tightened access to the ballot in the wake of the big lie and all that we saw on January 6th. You spoke passionately about the need for federal legislation to protect the voting rights. Didn't go anywhere. Speak to your frustration now as the fact that this Congress, with Democrats in control of both houses of Congress, Democrats control the White House, but nothing got done to protect the franchise of voters who put you and President Biden in office.
Jonathan, I take the long view. I was John Lewis's pastor, and I think often about him, and I think about a young John Lewis crossing that Edmund Pettus Bridge. State troopers on the other side. There was no reason for him to think he could win. And yet he crossed that bridge. I presided over his funeral. And when I was getting ready to do that, I was running for the Senate at the time. I asked myself, what was John Lewis thinking when he was facing these formidable odds? What I'm clear about is he wasn't thinking about getting a Presidential Medal of Freedom. He didn't think that at the end of his life, 3 presidents would show up on both sides of the aisle because they respected his voice. He was just trying to live to fight the next day. And through some stroke of destiny, he was able to bend the arc a little bit closer to justice. So these are difficult times, but as John Lewis's pastor, I don't have a right to give up. I'm going to keep fighting a good fight. I think we raised the issue around voting rights. I think it could have died last summer had I not pushed so hard. And so I'm going to keep pushing because I believe that a vote is a kind of prayer for the world we desire for ourselves and for our children. I think that democracy is the political enactment of a spiritual idea that all of us have a spark of the divine, and therefore we ought to have a voice in our democracy. And so we have to fight for this. This is our democracy. It doesn't belong to the politicians. Some of us get the sacred trust of representing the people for a time, but it belongs to the people. And I think when we stand up, we win. We don't know when it breaks through. I mean, think about how long voting rights was filibustered and civil rights, literally for decades. And yet people kept the faith. They believed that they could make a way out of no way, and which is a phrase, by the way, that's deep in the culture of the black church. You're not in a black church long before the preacher or somebody says God makes a way out of no way. It is a phrase born of struggle, and it's my honor to continue that struggle.